Good afternoon and welcome to Roth and Aggie Reviews. I'm Jacob. It's been a year since I did the last review, but I was busy with school and work, and I just decided that I had to put the reviews on hold for a while. But today I'm doing a review about a 2015 movie called The Witch. Now, before I get into this movie and the review, I want to just say something about the title of this movie. It's a clever way of putting a title. The movie is The Witch, which is, of course, as we all know, spelled with a W. The first letter is a W. But what the director did for this movie, which was quite clever, was used two V's as the title of the movie to make a W. And there's some mythology with witches that V has a special meaning. So that right off the beat, when I saw that, I was really impressed because it took the V letter mythology of witches into account with the movie. So what is the movie about? The Witch is a movie about a Puritan family, New England, in 1630s, about 60 years before the Salem witch trials, and it's a movie about a Puritan family that's kicked out of their village settlement type of thing, and they're forced to live in the woods far away from any type of community. And this movie deals with many issues. It deals with the issue of witchcraft, possession, abandonment, and family survival. And of course, historical information in this movie is not only well done, but it's painted accurately to the point where you really feel like you're in the time period that the movie is set in. So it's definitely what you would call a period film. So what's the movie about? It really revolves about a young girl, about 15, 16-year-old named Thomasin, who lives with her family after she gets kicked out, along with her family from the Puritan village, and they're forced to live in the forest. And what starts happening in the forest are kind of supernatural things, like birds start crashing into the house, dead animals start coming to the house, minor creepy stuff. But then the major thing that happens in the movie that really turns the movie into a seemingly creepy film into something much more sinister is a scene where the baby brother of Thomasin disappears while she is looking after him. Now this totally changes the family dynamics of the movie, because up until that point there's a good relationship between Thomasin and her siblings and her parents. What happens after the baby brother goes missing is that the family first blames her for the disappearance, because in their mind she was not looking after the baby properly. And then what happens after that, which is much darker, is the family believes that Thomasin may be a witch. And witches today is a totally different thing than witches back in 1630. Back in 1630, if a female was accused of being a witch, very severe consequences, possibly life-altering circumstances that would never make the life of the person the same, and ultimately a possible death penalty. Now, it's different in this case because the family lives far away from a village or a town or any community where there is, a judge or a prosecutor or any type of justice. So the family seems to be okay with Thomasin being a witch. It's at first saying she may be possessed, she may be, she may have, inclinations to do something bad, but at first it's just thought speculation. But as the grief turns into continuous grief, and the family is just so devastated over the baby's disappearance, it really turns into something much more accusational and more dangerous. The mother of Thomasin and the baby starts becoming very aggressive and very hating towards Thomasin, and at one point Thomasin runs away from home, and she goes missing for a couple of days. So I'm not going to get into the spoiler of this film or the ending, because the ultimate goal for the viewers that are watching this is for you guys to watch the movie and then see the twist and come to your own conclusions. But what I will discuss in this review are a couple of major ideas or things that are done in films. And the first one I'll start with is the subject of abandonment. So this family did something that I'm not going to get into in this review, but they did something, as I mentioned before, that got them kicked out of their community. And what happened was, then they end up abandoning their daughter because they believed that first that she was a bad sister, she was a bad older sister because her brother disappeared, and then they say they don't want to have anything to do with her after that period of time where they're okay, and they don't blame her. But then when they start suspecting witchcraft and other things, then they abandon her, and it's a very interesting subject of how one person who has something bad happen to them then does the bad exact same thing to another person. And this is what happens here. The family gets abandoned, kicked out from the village, and then they kick out their daughter from the family. So that's something that happens a lot in real life, and it's certainly portrayed well in this movie. It really shows the gravity of the situation that Thomasin is going through as a young girl being kicked out of the family. Not only that, but also being accused of being a witch. As I said, back in those times, much different thing than what it is today, and eventually could lead with the death penalty. The other thing I'll talk about is period films. Period films are often referred to films that are films that take place in a completely different year. So we're not talking if we're in 2017 right now, we're not talking about a movie that takes place in 2015. We're talking about movies that take place in the Middle Ages or in the Renaissance, Victorian era, or even World War II time, World War I. And this movie, it's worth mentioning that the director, Robert Eggers, did a ton of research into the movie, into the 1630 period of Puritans, to the point where he was checking the costumes, the language, the way people just acted together, and the way people interacted with each other. The status of Indians back in New England at that time. When you're watching this film, you might say, well, any director should do that. But then there's directors who do it, and then there's directors who do it well. And in this case, Robert Eggers does a phenomenal job. There's countless examples of how he does a good job, but I'm not gonna do justice by describing them. So again, watch the movie and you'll see. And if you're studying history or you're a historian, more the reason you should watch the movie, because it deals really well with how historically accurate it is. Another thing I want to discuss in this review is the subject of how kids were treated and how kids were brought up back in that time period, also relating to period film. The way kids acted in those times was completely different than today. Kids were expected to do hard labor. There was a lot more discipline expected from them. They were generally a lot better read back in those days. And religion was a big deal, depending whether you were Puritan or Protestant, or it didn't depend so much on religion. It had to be religion, and religion really dictated people's life. And some people could say, well, maybe that's why they behaved well, maybe, but that's just speculation. The reason I mention this is because I feel that this movie doesn't get into religion as a debate about what's religion, but it really describes the time well with religion and how religion was so important. And the reason why I keep talking about that is because, again, I did some research into the time period, and it's just really interesting how the movie portrays it so well. And another part about this movie is that the language is a bit different. It's 1630 English, and it's also English from England because the families are recent arrivals from England, specifically North England, and to a lot of American viewers who may not have background on English from that time period, it might be a bit confusing. But I have to say that even with that being said, as you watch the movie, the script is done in such a way that you start to understand it. And it's fascinating because me as a person who watched this movie, I had no idea about English in those days. But the script was cleverly crafted in the way that you could understand it as the movie went on. And it was a great learning experience. And that is a great example of a good screenwriter who can take language that you're relatively not familiar with, or not familiar at all with, like in my case, and then you start to understand it. And a lot of people can't do that. So that's a really good sign of a good writer and a good screenwriter. I'll talk about who this movie is aimed at. The movie is about kids, and it's about a family, but it's in no way, shape, or form a family movie. And I would say that kids should not watch this movie, not only because it's a horror film, but because it can give not the best ideas or examples about how to live. And I'm not going to get more into that because spoilers might come up, and I don't want to spoil, the twist or the movie. This movie is really aimed at people who are fascinated by the subject of possession and witchcraft, and people who are really into history. The fascinating thing about this movie is that I've read a lot of people comment about this movie, and a lot of people were saying that I never was into these kind of films, but it was done so well that I loved it, and maybe I'll explore movies of this kind more often. And that to me again is a great example of a great director who can make a movie that some people may not be really into because they're not into those kinds of movies, but he does it so well, and he takes a unique way to make it and a very attractive and appealing way to present it, that it actually attracts people that have no interest in the subject whatsoever. With all that being said, I want to just say that this movie really made me look differently at history. And we often say that these days are so bad, or kids these days, or these days are going bad, and nothing good's going to happen. But it really proves to you that things were, I don't want to use the word worse back in the day, or way back in history, but we're lucky to be in the times we are right now. Well, depending where you are, because in some parts of the world, it's not the best picture, not best environment. But I digress. So on that note, I want to say that it's great to be back to review movies, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more movies I'll be reviewing. Thank you for watching, and all the best. Bye bye.